In 2025, more than 10,000 companies in Japan went bankrupt. Among them, 300 completely disappeared without a trace. This is the highest number of bankruptcies in the past 12 years. The reason these companies went under isn't just because they ran out of money. The bigger problem is that they ran out of people. Support the information in this video about Japan's crisis of running out of people on the Sci Money Monster channel by scanning this QR code, or you can easily support the Sci Money Monster channel by just liking, sharing, or commenting to chat with us. But what I'd love most is if you could subscribe. Just hit the button once and you're done. If you haven't subscribed yet, just one click is enough. So next time we upload a video, we can meet again. Sound good? Thank you. If you've been following the news or this Try channel, you'll know that Japan's economy has been in a crisis for quite a while now. Household expenses in Japan have skyrocketed, reaching a peak over the past 3 years. As for Japan's debt, it's not even worth mentioning. Right now, Japan's public debt has reached 1,300 trillion yen, which is about 240% of its GDP. That's a huge amount. And as for the yen's value today, if it keeps getting weaker, it's getting dangerously close to the point of collapse. This situation has made Japan seem like it's about to give up its status as the world's creditor and stop maintaining its commitment to yield curve control, which is meant to keep the yield, or interest rate, on 10-year Japanese government bonds stable by buying its own debt. Japan is now saying, I probably won't do that anymore. I'll probably raise interest rates instead. And let me tell you, if Japan raises interest rates, it would shock the world. It would be a huge shock to the global financial sector. I've mentioned many times in several videos that if Japan raises interest rates, and not just once, but multiple times, it could actually be the starting point of the biggest financial crisis in world history. And the reason Japan is in such bad shape, barely able to keep things together, is because in reality, Japan isn't just facing an economic crisis. Japan is also dealing with a population collapse crisis. You could say that right now, Japan is, even if the economy is doing well or Japan still has a lot of money, it might not be able to solve the problems it's facing right now. That's because Japan has already entered a super aging society. Over 1/5 of the population is now over 70 years old. Many factories and companies are having to shut down, not just because the economy is bad or they've run out of money, but because they simply don't have enough workers. Schools in Japan are closing down at a rate of about 450 schools per year because there aren't enough new children being born to attend them. Japan is a country with the third largest economy in the world. So how did it reach this point of collapse? Back in the 1980s, Japan was booming. The GDP per capita, or the average income per person in Japan, grew from about $500 per person in the 1960s, just $500, to $25,000 per person per year in the 1980s. And Japan, which is just a small island nation, is about 26 times smaller than the total land area of the United States. But would you believe that there was a time when Japan was booming so much that its real estate market was on fire? The price of land in Japan, even though the country is 26 times smaller than America, was once 4 times higher than the entire United States. You could say that Japan experienced such explosive growth that its GDP even surpassed America's at one point. Back then, the United States had a GDP of about $7.6 trillion. Japan came in second, and the gap wasn't even that big. Japan's GDP was about $5.5 trillion. Japan was the country with the highest standard of living in all of Asia, and it also established itself as a global manufacturing powerhouse. In every aspect, whether it was the economy or anything else, it looked like Japan was on track to surpass the United States. The United States was the #1 economy in the world. Let me underline that. It really looked like Japan was about to overtake America. At this point, if you know a bit of history, you'll remember it all started when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. The United States was furious and bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in return. After that, Japan was left in ruins. Then it was the United States that helped rebuild Japan's economy. Ironically, it was also the United States that later quietly brought down Japan's economy. This whole tangled situation, that's exactly where the crisis in Japan today began. Let's go back to August 15th, 1945, when Japan announced its unconditional surrender in the war after the United States dropped nuclear bombs on Japan. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were completely destroyed, along with 67 other major cities in Japan that were also bombed. Millions of people were left starving, and Japan's economy was in ruins. Everything was destroyed. Japan at that time looked like a scene straight out of the apocalypse. And the suffering didn't discriminate, whether you were a child, a woman, or an elderly person. If you didn't die instantly from the bombing, you were dying slowly, as radiation was burning your internal organs. And yes, those bombs and that devastation came from the United States, sent to Japan. So did America see the aftermath of what they did? Was America really at ease? Not exactly. At that moment, the US wasn't just celebrating with pure joy. There was worry too, because after seeing Japan's state, some wondered if America was truly the good guy. Even the US had concerns after World War II ended. But honestly, their main concern wasn't Japan's devastation, it was something else entirely. They were worried Japan might turn communist, because at that moment, even though Japan had already been devastated by the war, if the Soviet Union managed to gain control over Japan, the United States saw that as the Soviets gaining a powerful new ally. You might ask, but wait, Japan was already in ruins from the war. How could they be considered powerful? Well, even though Japan had officially surrendered, they still had 6,500,000 soldiers at that time. So the question was it possible that Japan could be swayed by the Soviet Union to become communist? Well, it was possible, because after World War II ended, in 1949 to be exact, the whole world entered the Cold War era between the United States and the Soviet Union. That was the time of proxy wars. The Soviets supported Mao Zedong in taking over China, which led to the Chinese Civil War, and they also supported North Korea in invading South Korea. That's right. The country in the middle of the conflict zone was Japan. So was Japan worried about the Soviet Union then? They were definitely concerned. Japan was probably thinking, what should we do about the Soviets in America? Maybe we should side with America. That could have been one reason. The United States also worried that if the Soviet Union offered Japan attractive terms, Japan might actually end up becoming communist. Another thing America was really worried about, and why they didn't want Japan to go over to the other side, was Japan's location. Japan's feng shui was just too good to let the Soviet Union have it. At that time, the Soviets already had China and North Korea, right? If they got Japan too, just open up a map. It would mean they'd have access to the entire Pacific Ocean. And if you look at the Pacific Ocean, it could allow the Soviet side to head straight across the water to America. They could land in California and invade the US directly. So at that point, the United States had no choice. America's only option was to take control of Japan. But fortunately, at that time, the US approach to taking control of Japan wasn't about piling on more misery, since Japan was already devastated. They also didn't want to make America look even more like the villain on the world stage. Instead, the thinking was, at that time, the US wanted to make Japan a shining global showcase. Like, hey, everyone, look at Japan. If Japan had chosen the Soviet Union, they would have ended up starving and destitute. But if Japan chooses the United States, just watch. Japan will prosper and grow. Now, the next part of the story I'm about to tell will finally provide a clear answer to a question that's been on a lot of people's minds. Back then, after Japan was devastated by World War II, it was the United States that dropped the bombs. Weren't the Japanese angry? Why do so many Japanese people still like Americans and the United States so much? It's because after Japan lost the war, the US said they would take control of Japan and help the country prosper. And the US was really serious about it. They came in and worked miracles in terms of the economy and improving quality of life. really making things amazing for Japan. The United States worked miracles, almost like casting three powerful spells that had a huge impact. The first was injecting billions of dollars into Japan's economy. That money helped major companies avoid bankruptcy, like Toyota, for example. After surviving bankruptcy, those companies went on to become pillars that supported and built a strong foundation for Japan. The second thing is that the United States didn't just give money, they also provided know-how and knowledge. They helped Japan gain expertise in developing high-tech industries like steel manufacturing or electronics, sharing world-class know-how that enabled Japan to compete globally. And the third point is, after giving money and know-how to help produce products, the US also provided a market for those products. The United States opened its arms wide and allowed all Japanese goods to be imported and sold freely in America. Of course, that was a huge success. These three strategies from the United States were incredibly effective. In less than 20 years, Japan went from a country devastated by war to one that could grow and in terms of economic size, Japan surpassed Germany, the UK, and France, becoming the third largest economy in the world. But, while Japan's growth was great, at first it was also good for America. But later on, Japan's growth became maybe a little too much, and it started to benefit Japan more than the US. For example, in the 1980s, Japanese cars captured 23% of the US market share, while at that time, American car brands like Chrysler ended up going bankrupt and had to ask the government for a bailout of $1.5 billion. Americans started to wonder about this. And if we go back a bit to the 1970s, at that time, the United States dominated the semiconductor market with a 60% global share. But by 1989, Japan had overtaken the US. America had provided the know-how for manufacturing electronic goods, right? But Japan was really skilled and did it so well that by 1989, Japan was able to dominate the semiconductor market with 51% of the global market, while the United States was left with only a 35% market share. America was like, wait, what's going on? And then moving on to the 1980s, the economy was highly competitive. At that time, out of the world's top 10 largest companies, 6 were Japanese companies, which means there were more Japanese companies than American ones. And while Japan was booming, the US economy wasn't booming nearly as much. Japan's economy was thriving, but in America at that time, companies had to lay off employees just to keep the business afloat. So people were like, wait, is this really happening to America? And then thirdly, what Americans saw was Toyota and other Japanese car brands crushing Ford and General Motors, the American car companies. Back then, Americans were actually pretty angry about what was happening. There were even people going live on national TV, smashing vintage Japanese Toyota Coronas with huge hammers. It was a symbolic campaign where anyone who came in to smash a Japanese car could do it for just $1. That just shows that at that time, a country that had fully recovered and rebuilt from the devastation of war, thanks to America, really, was now on the verge of overtaking America. And America absolutely did not like that at all. And then, in 1985, the United States entered into a formal agreement with Japan, proposing a new arrangement. All right, Japan, why don't you sign the Plaza Accord? And Japan found itself with no choice but to sign the document. This was the major turning point that effectively paralyzed Japan's economy. So what exactly was the Plaza Accord? While the details are quite complex, to put it simply, the Plaza Accord was an international agreement that caused the value of the Japanese yen appreciated to be worth more than $1 when comparing these two currencies. The United States had a magic spell to make Japan's economy boom and grow. But they also had a spell for destruction. With just a snap, everything collapsed much faster than it was built. Take a look at this graph. In 1985, $1 could be exchanged for 260 yen. But by 1987, in less than 2 years, suddenly $1 could only be exchanged for about 130 yen, meaning the yen had doubled in strength. That means, for example, if a Toyota car used to sell for $10,000 in the United States, now it would have to be sold for $20,000 in order to make the same profit in yen as before. This means that Japan, just sitting there doing nothing, suddenly saw its products become much more expensive in the US market. That means losing their competitive cost advantage entirely. And losing that significant cost advantage basically destroyed Japan's entire export supply chain at the very same time. Because of this major economic event, Japan decided to try to survive by moving their primary production bases out of Japan to various Southeast Asian countries. One of those specific countries where Japan set up production was Thailand. That's exactly why Thailand became one of the countries with a large number of Japanese car manufacturing bases. Another thing Japan did to fight that economic crisis was to lower interest rates. At that time, Japan's interest rate was at 5%. Japan decided to cut the interest rate in half, down to just 2.5%, hoping that this would encourage investors, entrepreneurs, and business people to borrow money to invest in their businesses. So, did that stimulus to get people to borrow more money work? Yes, it did. People did come to borrow money, and business people borrowed a lot more. But the thing is, it didn't work in the way it was intended. The banks expected that people would borrow money to start businesses, but borrowers didn't actually use it for business. They used it for speculation instead. Since the money was easy to get, they put it into buying stocks on the stock market, buying land, and investing in real estate. And they weren't even buying real estate to run businesses. They were just speculating for profit. So, what happened next? Drum roll. If you know the answer, leave a comment. Okay, I'll reveal it now. 3, 2, 1. What happened next was a bubble. After the Bank of Japan lowered interest rates, Japan's economy experienced a bubble. The Nikkei index shot up threefold, from 6,000 points all the way to 38,915 points in 1989. The returns were incredible. Anyone who invested in the Nikkei during that time got returns of 300 to 500%. People got really rich. This caused the value of companies in Japan, whether big or small, that were listed on the stock market. They all grew, but this growth wasn't because they were selling more products, had more offerings, or expanded their businesses. The growth came from rising stock prices driven by speculation. So, what did these companies do after their valuations increased? They used their company shares as collateral to borrow more money, which they then used for even more speculation, inflating the bubble even further. At that time, there were bubbles in land and real estate too. The bubble just kept growing and growing. This is what led to what I mentioned at the beginning, that land in Japan, a small island nation, 26 times smaller than America, was at that time 4 times more expensive than all the land in the United States. Until one day, out of the blue, the BOJ, Japan's central bank, suddenly realized, wait, what have we done? There was massive inflation in Japan, and they decided they had to fix the problem immediately. What the BOJ decided to do at that time was, the interest rate was at 2.5%. The BOJ said, we have to fight inflation. So the BOJ raised the interest rate from 2.5% up to 6%. Oh my gosh, when the interest rate goes up, that means everyone's debt instantly doubled overnight. And yes, the bubble that had been swelling just burst right then and there. The Nikkei, it crashed hard. And what I'm about to tell you from here will really explain why when we hear about this. But then, why are there so many zombie companies in Japan? Why did so many go bankrupt? Why are there so many zombie companies in Japan? Well, here's what happened. When the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, decided to raise the interest rate, the debt situation changed. The interest payments for each indebted company more than doubled overnight. And of course, when debt increases that much, there are bound to be people who are shocked, like, whoa, what are we going to do now? How could they pay? They just couldn't keep up with their debt payments anymore. And when companies can't pay, bankruptcy should follow, right? But the Japanese government decided they couldn't let them fail. Why? Mainly because if they went bankrupt, banks wouldn't collect any interest. So what did the government do? If banks can't collect interest because companies go under, that's a problem. So they decided that for any debt, let's say you have a debt of 10 million, right? Okay, you owe 10 million. The bank would then lend this company another 2 million and say, don't go bankrupt, just keep existing. Stay open so you can keep paying interest, okay? And the company agrees, like, okay, we get another 2 million, but we can't really run the business anymore. We'll just stay open to use that money to keep paying interest. Basically, it's a company that exists only to pay interest, nothing else. So running a business like this turns it into a zombie company. And there were actually a lot of them during the 2000s. There was a survey of all the companies in Japan, and can you believe it? 30% of all companies in Japan during the 2000s were zombie companies, just existing to pay off debt, nothing else. And another mistake, by the way, is not just from the government or the central bank, but also from private companies themselves. It's another error in judgment that private companies made when the economy collapsed and went bankrupt, was that they stopped hiring new graduates. At first glance, it might not seem like a big deal, just not hiring new grads, but it actually is a huge issue, because large companies in Japan stopped hiring new graduates for over 10 years. That means the new graduates from that era, starting from 1995, who are now about 50 years old, almost none of them ever got good jobs or decent salaries. And with Japanese culture, I have to explain. First, they studied extremely hard with the goal of reaching the day they could join a kairetsu, so that a big company would hire them and they could stay with that company until retirement. But when this didn't happen for over 10 years, it meant that more than 1 million young people from that era didn't get good jobs. They couldn't afford to buy houses and had to keep living with their parents even as they got older. With no money and no jobs, they didn't get married and didn't have children. This led to a situation where, of the massive decline of Japan's population during that era, which is what they call the lost generation. This led to a situation where Japan ended up with a huge number of elderly people and hardly any new children being born. Demographers had already warned that if Japan's birth rate fell below 800,000 births per year, the Japanese economy wouldn't be able to sustain itself. But today, Japan's birth rate has dropped below 600,000 births per year. This means what will happen to Japan's economy going forward? This teaches us that we shouldn't rely on anyone. No country helps another for free. The second point is that in the economic system, sometimes you have to let nature take its course. If a company can't survive and needs to go bankrupt, you should let it go bankrupt for the long-term health of the economy. The third point is that everything we do today determines the future, because mistakes, especially at the national level, are huge. If a mistake happens today, it can lead to long-lasting devastation that affects generations to come. And by the time we realize it, it'll be too late to fix anything.